We're here. We're here. We might be a little bit late. But we're here.
We're definitely late.
Definitely late.
It's my wife's fault.
Easy, Trent. Look, there's not even anybody in here right now anyway. So
I can say whatever I want.
Nobody cares. You can say whatever you want. She's definitely not. But she might listen on the playback, though. Trent
possible.
Blaming his wife for the 10-minute delay. Had some internet issues over there. But look, we could either roll right out of the gate at 6 o'clock and have Trent looking all glitchy there on the other side, or make sure we get the connection right. We opted to get the connection right, and we're happy to be back on a Monday at 6 p.m. as we're trying out this new schedule here to see how things work. Trent, before we get into, because we were going through the list before we went live, there's obviously a lot of different things that we want to cover. A lot of it's centered around just, I don't know what's going on with Ohio State. There comes a certain point where, like, I know that I reached it even with the Michigan fan base, where it was like, "What's up, fuckers?" That's right, CJ. It's good to have you in here. Hopefully, you can spend the time in here before you got to get your daughter to practice. But there was a point in time when, even with the Michigan football fans, where, after that 2016 game and the JT was short and this and that, and I just got tired of it. I'm like, stop making excuses. Like, Michigan lost. Ohio State has a better team. Like, did the loss suck? Absolutely. But by and large, I was able to just sit back for the better part of that 2-decade ass whooping we were on the receiving end and just say, Ohio State has a better football program. They were a better team. And for some odd reason, there is such a delusion down in Columbus. And we've seen that play out now over the last several days, whether it be the EA Sports cover that's come out, or some of the recent comments by Urban Meyer, or if you caught, I don't know how many people here are listening to the Paul Feinbaum show, but he did have a really interesting segment with an Ohio State beat writer who's by all accounts, from everything I've heard, he's a good guy. He's been covering, the team for a very long time, well respected, but Paul Feinbaum put him in a blender. This guy tried to come onto the show with a bunch of excuses as to why Ohio State wasn't succeeding, and Feinbaum was having none of it. So we'll get into some of that stuff here very, very shortly in the show. But I did want to start out the gate with something that I don't know that the fans are going to care about it, Trent, but this is episode 15 for you and I. And we started this thing, I launched the website back in mid to late January, and we've gone through some trials and tribulations, and we are learning firsthand, and I've mentioned this before, that it is not easy to get a publication off the ground and running, not at the level that we want it to be, in terms of being credentialed, in terms of being profitable. And, we checked the box for at least the credentialing side of things. We are now recognized as a credentialed media outlet covering Michigan athletics, which I think is huge accomplishment when you consider how this all started. It's just a Facebook fan page way back in 2017 to where it is now. But another big piece of that was profitability, Trent. We got to make some damn money doing this. We can't work for free. And I have asked Trent to work for free for months. And he has graciously, given his sweat and his effort into helping get this thing off the ground. And we reached a pretty big milestone last week. And I'm not going to get into the specifics because, generally speaking, I think most people really don't care about how all that works. But the bottom line is, as a company, Winged Helmet Media LLC checked off another very big box in terms of us being around for a long time. And I'm very excited about that. And Trent, you've been paying close attention to it as well. We were good, and then it looked like, I don't know, maybe we weren't good, but now we're good, and things are trending in the right direction. And once again, I say all that to say thank you to Trent for the work that he's put in here. And also thank you to everybody that's in the comment section, everybody that's here watching, and everybody that, comments and likes and reads the articles that we put out, because literally none of it is possible without you guys playing a really big part of that. So extremely grateful for all of that. I had to get that out of the way. That's sort of my soapbox speech, but let's move into some of the good stuff here. We got some news about Michigan's football schedule. We know that they're going to open the season under the lights against Fresno State. Before we move on to some of the other times that we got, there was a little bit of a mixed reaction when it was announced that Michigan's first game was going to be under the lights against a team like Fresno State. Do you take any sort of issue with that? I mean, you're going to be there. You're going to be in the big house. You're making the drive up from the state of Ohio to come watch the Wolverines play. What are your thoughts on opening the season at Michigan Stadium under the lights against Fresno State?
As a football fan and as a Michigan fan, I've always liked primetime football. It's good. The atmosphere is great. However, as a credentialed media member, I absolutely hate night games. To me, every game should be at noon, 3:30 at the latest. We should never, ever have a 7:30 or 8 o'clock game. I know nobody cares, but you got to sit there until the game's over at 11 o'clock. Then you have to go to the press conference, which takes roughly 45 minutes to an hour sometimes. And then you have to put up a couple stories after the game, which takes some time. And then for me, I drive back to Ohio for a 2-hour drive. So during night games, I don't get home till like 2 or 2:30 in the morning. So I absolutely hate night games. They should never, ever take place.
Here's the difference, right? You can see some of the fans. Darren May is saying it should be the most affordable night game. Darren, have you learned nothing about the way that Michigan prices tickets? There's nothing affordable about going to see a game at Michigan Stadium, unless you're going by yourself. Then maybe it's a little more affordable. But damn, try taking a family of 4 to a Michigan game these days. Not easy. CJ Frazier says, love opening a night game as national champions. Gives us all day to celebrate. CJ's going to be out there drinking, living life, just loving college football. Yeah, it absolutely makes sense from a fan standpoint. But then here's Tony Petrosky, who I've mentioned before. He's a photographer. I see him down on the sideline all the time. He says, sucks coming home at 1 a.m. Yeah, I think that's the difference. Like, and I was thinking about this. Overall, I love night games because I love the primetime atmosphere. I think the fan side of me loves it. There's something about playing under the lights that I think is unmatched. But when you are fortunate enough to cover a team, especially a team that you love, like, yeah, it changes the game because you can't spend all day getting shit-faced watching other games and just sort of hanging out with the fellas and cooking out and enjoying life. Like, you're prepping for the game. You're getting ready. You get to the stadium, like, I don't know, 2 hours early minimum. You get in there, you start getting yourself ready, and then you're there for the 3 hours of the game. And then you're looking at least an hour to 2 hours after the game with post-game press conferences, me with the photography. I've got to get some things loaded, some things edited. So when you talk about a night game, like the work night is going to go, I don't know, 1, 2 in the morning, maybe 3 in the morning, depending how much needs to be edited. It's a lot of work, but I think overall, look, man, it's week 1. College football's back. Michigan's first game. I'll be happy to be in the big house. I know it's going to be a long evening, but we've talked about this before, Trent. Like, a long day covering college football is so much better than a short day doing something you absolutely hate. So I'll take it every day of the week. Yeah. We have another time. We have actually 2 other times on Michigan's schedule that we're aware of. So the first game, 7:30 prime time on NBC against Fresno State. The very next week, Michigan is set to host the Texas Longhorns. That one's going to be a noon kickoff. A lot of people thought that should have been flipped. You play Fresno State at noon, and then you make the primetime game Texas. I maybe subscribe to that idea a little bit, but in any event, the time is already set. You get Texas at noon. Trent, what are your thoughts on Texas at noon? I mean, you like that setup?
Yeah, like I said, I love noon games as a credentialed media guy, but dude, give me Texas and Michigan at CBS at 3:30. That would be the perfect slot right there.
I think the most ideal slot, if you're trying to get the best of both worlds, is definitely that 3:30 spot, because you start off during the day, but then in the second half, it starts to get dark out. So you get that night game atmosphere, but you're not there till all hours of the night. So yeah, I could see that. But I mean, that Texas matchup, that just Michigan versus Texas in the big house, that just, to me, screams prime time. I'm a little bit surprised that that's a noon kickoff, but it is what it is. And then we got another kickoff time announced shortly before we went live here. It's arguably the biggest game of the year. It is the game, Michigan versus Ohio State. The rivalry returns to Columbus this year. And as usual, the 2 teams are going to kick off at noon. We were talking about this a little bit before we went live. We didn't have much time to do it because you had a bunch of internet issues on your side, but I am curious. with Michigan and Ohio State routinely kicking off at noon, do you ever hope that there's a scenario or a time where we are going to see, we talk about big games being kind of meant for prime time, right? Do we ever see a Michigan-Ohio State primetime matchup? Do you think that's anything we see in the cards in the near future, or is this one destined to be a noon game until the day we die?
I'm not banking on it, but I also wasn't banking on Michigan and Michigan State playing prime time either, and that just happened. But I don't. It has nothing to do with the game. It just your fans are tailgating all day. They're drunk. The two fan bases already hate each other. That just gives more time for drinking, and by the time the game starts, I think there'd just be more issues with the fans, and I think that's the entire reason why I don't think that game will ever be a night game. Although it would be very, very neat to see that game played under the lights.
But aren't there other big rivalries that play at night? Like, aren't there other big rivalries that are
Alabama, LSU?
Yeah, I mean, Alabama, LSU, Alabama, Auburn. You know what I mean? Games like these guys play at prime time. Like, we don't see two sides going to war. Like, you're always going to have shitheads. I mean, clearly in the Ohio State fan base, like, you can bank on it. It's going to happen. But I don't know, man. I don't know how much I subscribe to that. I think, yeah, you're going to have the drunken idiots and you're going to have altercations, but I think that's going to be the case no matter what. At some point in time, I would like to see Michigan, Ohio State under the lights. What I do think complicates it a little bit is that you have a game taking place in late November. You're pushing December at this point, so the temperatures are cold. People got to make a drive. I mean, in 2021, it was like a blizzard outside, so I've made the drive away from that game a number of times where the roads haven't been great. So yeah, when you take all those factors into account, an entire day of drinking between two fan bases that hate each other, and then the potential of having to deal with not so good road conditions at the end, it just feels like that one's always going to be an afternoon game. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't want to see that one take place in primetime at some point. And to be honest, that might be something that becomes more realistic. We're not going to get into that topic this time, but did talk a little bit before about the potential of moving that game with the new, no divisions and the expanded playoff, and the reality that Michigan and Ohio State could play to back-to-back weekends. And is it advantageous to move that game so that it means a little bit more? Maybe that's the scenario where you see a primetime game. But if that game remains at the end of the season, I agree with you for all the reasons you listed and more. I don't think we're ever going to see that really move.
I also think there's something with Big Ten scheduling where they can't have primetime games past a certain date, whether it's like beginning of November, middle of November, I don't know. But I was thinking there was something there with the Big Ten itself that you can't have night games past a certain date.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not aware of that. That would answer it for sure. That would be a big reason why we haven't seen it yet. But I think all the other factors that you mentioned before, just between the two fan bases, the alcohol, and now, you should be able to buy alcohol in Michigan Stadium, right? So you don't need to spend all your afternoon getting shit-faced out in the parking lot. You can go into Michigan Stadium and pay $27 for a Bud Light. Like, why wouldn't you want to do that? You know what I mean? So you're getting the best of both worlds. But yeah, I think a lot of it's alcohol-driven, some of it's weather-driven, and then some of it's just hatred-driven. And speaking of hatred, should we just transition to Ohio State? I feel like we're going to spend a little bit of time on what's going on in Columbus and what's going on with that fan base, because I just don't get it. I don't get it. I think I said it at the beginning of the show. I can't even remember. Was it at the beginning of the show or before we went live? But I'm going to say it again. There was a point in time where, as a Michigan fan, you just had to take your medicine. You just had to accept the fact that Ohio State had a better team. You had to accept the fact that you were losing. It was painful. Don't get me wrong. I don't know that Ohio State fans are capable of dealing what Michigan fans had to deal with for 2 damn decades, but we dealt with it. We came out on the other side. And now that Michigan's making a little bit of a run here, listen, I've never respected the Ohio State fan base, but they've always had a reason to be cocky, right? Because they were winning and the team was successful, and you could talk shit with them, but at the end of the day, they were winning at a high level, and there really wasn't much pushback you could give. But to watch that fan base transition from arrogant and cocky and annoying in that way to being like this whiny I don't know, constantly making excuses type fan base. Trent, I actually got some pictures that were sent to me. This was when these were some of the photos that came out from when they announced that Donovan Edwards was going to be front and center on the EA Sports College Football 25 Deluxe Edition. At least I think that's the one.
Yeah, it is.
It initiated that announcement, and that picture initiated a complete meltdown from the folks in Columbus, and even some of the folks in East Lansing, some of the Michigan State fans, which, look, Ohio State fans are one thing, but having to listen to Michigan State fans have any sort of part in the conversation about who belongs on the cover, like,
yeah, what are they talking about?
that fan base and that program is irrelevant. You hadn't made a bowl game in the last 2 seasons. We all know what's been going on at Michigan State. Like, consider yourself lucky you're even allowed to purchase the game. But in terms of discussing the cover art, like, you have no say in that conversation. But Ohio State fans, I thought the criticism of Donovan Edwards was extremely odd, Trent, because if anybody knows what Donovan Edwards is capable of, wouldn't you think it's the good and kind folks down in Columbus? Wouldn't you think they're well aware of why a guy like Donovan Edwards might be featured on the cover?
Man, you would think so. I mean, at the very least, they can see the back of his jersey, which is exactly what they did a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, you would think they know exactly who Donovan Edwards is. But the funny part was, on social media, half of them were like, who is this guy? We don't even know who Donovan Edwards is, blah, 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 blah. Like, dude, like, come on. Whether you're a Michigan fan or not, you know who Donovan Edwards is. Like, get over yourself.
Yeah, I don't understand it. I mean, he went for 200 plus in Columbus, was a big part of the reason why Ohio State lost by 22 points in their own building. And then the Wolverines proceeded to go plant the Block M flag on the 50-yard line and claim that field for their own. And so I don't understand it, Trent. I don't understand the and look, it's not just limited to men, as we can see in the photos that were sent into us. This is a gender-wide problem down there in Columbus. They just cannot accept the fact that Michigan has gone on an incredible run and has owned Ohio State for now the last 3 years. And to be quite honest, I said this earlier today, and we'll probably get into it when we talk about best case scenarios and worst case scenarios, but Matt Kirby says BMI is on point. Yes, I agree. I'm not buying into the Ohio State hype. There's a lot of people that think, based on what's happened this offseason, that, here we are once again. We've seen this movie before. Ohio State is the offseason darling. They've done incredible things on the recruiting trail, and look at what they've done in the transfer portal, and they're bringing back all these guys. We've heard this same movie before, but at the end of the day, Trent, Michigan beating Ohio State over the last 3 years has not been it's not been a matter of talent. Like, Ohio State, I would argue, and then maybe let me ask you this. I would say that over the last 3 years, Ohio State has had a more talented team than Michigan. Do you think that's fair?
Oh, I fully agree. Talent-wise, Ohio State's arguably the most talented team in the country, and they have been for several years now. The problem has been their toughness, and that's what's been talked about by a ton of people. Michigan has out-physicaled Ohio State the last 3 years in the trenches, and that's the exact reason Michigan has won, is because they've dominated the line of scrimmage.
Right. So, I mean, with that being said, and you're exactly right, it's never been a talent thing with Ohio State. I mean, you're talking about a team that had C.J. Stroud, Marvin Harrison Jr., and they got boat raced in their own building by Michigan. The difference in this rivalry over the last 3 years, yeah, if you're whiny and you're a guy that likes to make excuses, you can say, oh, it was cheating. Go back and watch the highlights and watch your players get pushed around by the Wolverines. That has nothing to do with cheating. That's mentality. That's a physical toughness. That is a culture shift at the University of Michigan that took a long time and a lot of ass beatings to change, but Michigan has owned the toughness part of that rivalry. And because Ryan Day is still the head coach down there, and because Michigan still has a culture of toughness in Ann Arbor, I know there's a lot of new names and a lot of new faces, but to me, Ohio State isn't number one, and they're not even number two on the list of the toughest games for Michigan in 2024. So we'll get to that. But again, like the constant whining, You had athletic director Gene Smith, who I believe is on his way to retirement. I'm not sure how much longer he's going to be the athletic director at Ohio State, on his way to retirement. But recently he was quoted as saying, talking about a couple of the wins that Michigan had over Ohio State, that there should be an asterisk next to those wins. This is the athletic director. So again,
wasn't he the same one who got in trouble at was on the sidelines of one of these games with a security guard or something?
Yeah, that was in 2023. That was this last game. He was down on the sideline. He was walking around thinking he owned the stadium, owned the field. Somebody told him to look. I don't know how often you've been down in the field, but as a photographer, and Tony Petrosky, if he's still in here, he knows if you cross certain lines that are put down on the field, it doesn't matter who the hell you are. They're telling you to get back, get off the field. Like, I hear it every single time I'm taking photographs. But apparently Gene Smith just thought, like, hey, I'm the AD. I can walk wherever I want. I can do whatever I want here. And when somebody put him in check, as they often do, he whined and cried like a baby. He threw a fit. And like, this just, I don't understand this mentality from these people. It's like, it's a sense of entitlement, but it's also like the constant losing has broken them mentally. So there you have your athletic director saying, well, at least two of those losses should have an asterisk. We can't have cheating in the game. And then you have Tim May. Tim May is an individual who has been covering Ohio State for a very long time. I don't know him personally, but from what I've learned, he's well respected in the industry. But he was recently on the Paul Feinbaum show. I know a lot of you out there aren't watching the Paul Feinbaum show, but he was on the Feinbaum show. Jesus Christ, slow down here, Chris. And he was talking about Ohio State and the outlook for the season. And he had started it off by saying something to the effect of, Ohio State has spent $13 to $15 million building up their roster. But then Tim May, who is a respected journalist in his field, went on to list a number of excuses, saying that, well, Ohio State was robbed by Clemson, and Ohio State was robbed by Georgia, and Ohio State, it wasn't fair with the Connor Stallions thing. And Paul Feinbaum, who is like a complete dink, was like, I'm not having it. Like, he basically pointed out that the common denominator here is Ryan Day, and that he keeps coming up short. And so when you take all of that into account, why is it, Trent, do you think that this group that was so accustomed to winning just can't help but make excuse after excuse after excuse as to why they can't get it done on the field? Doesn't matter if it's Michigan. Hell, we got cheated against Georgia. We got cheated against Clemson. Life just isn't fair for Ohio State. What do you think is driving that?
Well, I think that's the entire problem is Ohio State fans aren't used to losing. Hey, look, I've lived in Ohio for 30 years. I'm used to plenty of Buckeye fans. I'm surrounded by Ohio State fans. And I think that's my whole issue with Ohio State itself. It's not necessarily the team, the players, it's the fans. Like, they're so used to winning. And like you said, they've always been arrogant, cocky, and now that they've lost 3 years in a row to Michigan, they can't accept it. And then with this whole Connor Stallions thing coming out, that's what they're hanging their hat on. We lost because Michigan knew our signs, signals. No, if first off, the Big Ten thing that came out said that teams have known about this for, quote, years now. So going back to 2 years ago, if they knew about it then, there's no way they're keeping their same signs and signals against Michigan. This year, it all came out. Everyone knew about it. You're definitely not keeping your same signs and signals. So that you can take that excuse completely off the board. Michigan was the better team. They beat you fair and square. Like, there was no cheating going on in that situation. If Ryan Day was using the same stuff that Michigan might have known, then he's more of an idiot than I thought. It is what it is. But that's the entire problem. Is Ohio State is not used to losing. They're used to winning. They're used to beating Michigan, and now it's happened 3 years in a row, and the fans they can't take it. So anything that they can hang their hat on, they will.
Yeah, it's just such weird energy, man. Like, I don't know. Like, I always I feel cringy when Michigan fans make excuses for losing. Like, to me, I feel like it's such a bad look. And it's not like it's a handful of people who have adopted this mentality in Columbus. It's the entire fan base. Hell, it's people that cover the program. They just cannot bring themselves to accept the fact that, hey, you just got beat by a better football team and then move on and try to get better. And so I just think, hey, again, I'm not in the business of giving Ohio State fans advice, but I'm not sure that they're aware of how pathetic it looks from the outside looking in. But I think to the rest of the country, you are now the fan base that just whines and cries all the time about how life isn't fair. And it's a really poor look. And look, I said this before, I feel like, Trent, I mean, we had the weather in 2021 and some guys were dealing with the flu, and then you had, stallions, and just things weren't fair for Ohio State. Feel like now we've reached a point where we have run out of excuses in 2024. I'm not sure that there's any other excuse Ohio State can go to. In fact, I think the motto for this year has to be no more excuses for Ohio State. You have gone out and done extremely well on the recruiting trail. You have done extremely well in the transfer portal. You have paid a lot of money to make sure you could put together what seems to be a roster that can make a serious run at the national championship. If you come up short on November 30th, I don't want to hear about cheating. I don't want to hear about injuries. I don't want to hear about how life isn't fair. Just take your medicine and accept that the Michigan Wolverines are just a tougher program than you are. That's the reality of it, particularly with Michigan breaking in a new head coach and having to replace nearly every starter on the offensive side of the ball. Everything is lining up for Ohio State to be able to win that game at home. If the Wolverines go in there and have a repeat of 2022, I would love for Ryan Day to stick around, but I'm not sure it's survivable. Trent, we've talked about that before. It feels like he's coaching for his job on November 30th.
Yep. I agree. If Michigan goes in there and beats them, I don't see how Ryan Day makes that one alive. I mean, we were already hearing after losing this year, the fans wanted Ryan Day gone. And the dude has an incredible win percentage. Absolutely incredible. Like, he wins almost every game that he coaches. But losing to Michigan 3 straight years has him on the hot seat. And if they lose one more time, I just don't see how he survives it.
Yeah, and again, it's not a given. I just talked about how they've loaded up from the portal. They've got veteran guys returning. Everything is lining up for Ohio State to be this juggernaut, but that's the same case every single year. They say the same shit about Ohio State. They rank them higher than Michigan. Michigan always goes in with the lower ranking. Like, this is the same movie we have seen play out year after year. And the difference maker in this rivalry has been toughness. And until Ohio State proves otherwise, Michigan is just the tougher program. And if you think the Wolverines are going to show up in Columbus not thinking they can win that football game, then I don't know what to tell you. Then you haven't really learned anything over the last 3 years. And I think a lot of them haven't learned much. But Michigan is going to show up to win that game. And again, if the Wolverines do, just miss me with all the excuses. You have officially run out. Your athletic director, your journalists, your fan base, you guys have leaned on every excuse in the book as to why you can't get it done. At some point in time, you just got to admit reality. And reality is Michigan's a tougher football program than what you are. Speaking of Ryan Day, I thought this was interesting because I saw a quote come out from all people, Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer's got a big issue with NIL, which is kind of a head scratcher to me, Trent. This was another thing we talked about before we went live. Urban Meyer, let's see. I want to pull up the quote because I want to make sure I get it accurate. Urban Meyer recently shared his thoughts on NIL. And he said, if Lou Holtz or Urban Meyer or Marvin Harrison Jr. or CJ Stroud, they want to go use their name and help sell cars, help a business, that's great. But to have a 17-year-old demand money for a visit, to pay these players a lot of money to go on a visit or visit a charity for 20 minutes, and they write you a check for $50,000, that's cheating. That's not what this is all about. I'm very disappointed where it went in terms of NIL. And Trent, I find those comments to be very interesting because of how upfront everybody in Columbus has been about the amount of money they've had to pay to put that roster together. So Is Urban Meyer essentially calling Ryan Day a cheater? Is that what's happening here? Is that what we're seeing? What are your thoughts on what Urban Meyer had to say there?
Well, my first initial thought was, is Urban Meyer pro Michigan now? Because that's what Michigan's did. They're not paying their players $50,000 just to walk onto campus and sign an autograph or this or that. So his comments are definitely pro what Michigan's doing, because Michigan's not giving the players the bag like Ohio State's doing, or Alabama or Oregon, etc. But yeah, I mean, Urban, he was only used to beating Michigan. He's a huge Ohio State guy, and I'm sure he's not taking it kindly that Ryan Day has lost 3 games in a row. So, I'm sure that's in the back of his mind. Like, hey, this dude's paying these players this much money. He can't beat Michigan. Like, what's going on here? So yeah, I'm sure that that's in the back of his mind.
You think there was a little bit of Ryan Day in his mind as he was going through this? Because we've heard Nick Saban, who, it's not like either one of us have been in the rooms working with Urban Meyer or Nick Saban. We know exactly how they were going about their business. But you have Urban Meyer and Nick Saban being very outspoken about the way NIL is being used in today's college football. Doesn't it seem a little bit strange? Because these are two guys, Saban and Meyer, that it's like, when you looked at them, you were like, yeah, these guys have a bag man for sure, right? They have to. And so it's just, to me, it's strange to watch these two guys come out and basically speak against the way NIL is being used. And I think you make a great point, Trent. They're basically advocating for exactly the way Michigan is running their NIL program in Ann Arbor. A lot of fans, Michigan fans, aren't a big fan of it. They're maybe Dante Moore is on campus this year if you're willing to hand out a bag. Maybe there's other big time recruits that went elsewhere if you're able to to pay these kids to get on campus. But Michigan has made it clear that they're not willing to do those sort of things. But Ohio State, in a way, has made it clear that they are willing to do those things. And so for Urban Meyer to come out and essentially use the word cheating to build your roster, I just thought that was a little too coincidental, given how open Ohio State's been about the amount of money they've paid and what Urban Meyer had to say. So I think you're right, Trent. I think that, he obviously built something special at Ohio State. He's watched it now deteriorate to the point where they can't seem to beat Michigan over the last few years. And I got to believe he feels a certain type of way about it. I'm not saying that there's like a rift between Urban Meyer and Ryan Day, but it was clear to me that Urban Meyer enjoyed beating Michigan, and it's something that Ryan Day can't seem to figure out.
You can just watch Urban Meyer on the sidelines the last 3 years.
That poor guy.
And you can tell he's miserable.
Front row seat as part of Fox. He's had a front row seat to all of it. It's been phenomenal.
He looks absolutely miserable down there on the sidelines watching that game. Like, he's not having any fun at all watching it.
I mean, yeah, I would imagine it would be difficult to have a good time watching a former team that you built into this juggernaut, get pummeled by Michigan year in and year out. But that's where we are. So let's transition from Ohio State, because I feel like we've spent enough time talking about, just please, for the love of God, get your shit together. Stop crying. Stop whining. Just accept it. Move on and hope your program gets better. But like the cheating stuff and the life isn't fair stuff, it's a bad look for a fan base that once had every right to be confident and cocky about the program they were a fan of. Now it's a sad display, man, and it's embarrassing. And in some ways, I pity it, but in a lot more ways, Trent, I'm really enjoy watching it play out. It's fun being on this side of it. But let's talk. Go ahead. Anything else you want to add?
I was just going to say, being down here in Ohio, yeah, this last 3-year run for Michigan has been incredible, being around all the fans of Ohio. That's really all I have to say, but it's been a fun ride.
Trent's out there in the streets of Ohio just rocking his Charles Woodson jersey just to go get the mail. He's putting on his Michigan robe. Like, he's doing whatever he can do to rub it in. And as you should, Trent, especially somebody who lives in enemy territory down there. I feel for you. But switching back to Michigan a little bit, I spent some time thinking about this because I put out an article, and I think we'll get to that to close out the show, about what I think the best case and worst case scenario for Michigan is. And I know there's a lot of people that are going to say, well, worst case scenario is they lose every game. Best case scenario is they win every game. But we're trying to be realistic here about what could potentially play out in the 2024 season. Before we get to that, and Trent and I discuss that, and we'll put it up on the screen, what I think is the best case and worst case. And Trent and I will have some dialogue, and obviously would love to have some dialogue from the fans as well. But I was curious. How a national championship winning team fares the following year. And I was thinking about this more in the context of the college football playoff era, because I didn't want to go back to the BCS era. And I also did this knowing that the landscape changes quite a bit in 2024 with the expanded playoff. But with that being said, how successful are teams the year after winning a national championship? So I had to go back to 2014. Ohio State was obviously the first team to win the college football playoff national championship. So in 2014, Trent, I'm just going to run through this, and then afterwards, let's chop it up a little bit and see where we think Michigan might fit into the mold. But I thought this was interesting because from what I can see, teams that go out and win a national championship in the playoff era, they perform extremely well the following year. And you got to think national championship teams, they lose talent to the NFL. That's just part of the game. So in 2014, Ohio State goes 14-1. They win the national championship. In 2015, Ohio State goes 12-1, misses the playoffs, but won the bowl game. So a 12-1 season, win your bowl game, a respectable season in Ohio State, 12-1. In 2015, Alabama went 14-1, won the national championship. The following year in 2016, Bama once again went 14-1, and they lost in the national championship. So they made another appearance in the national championship, lost, but still finished with a 14-1 record. In 2016, Clemson went 14-1, won the national championship. The following year, they went 12-2 and missed the playoffs. So 12-2, still not a bad season, but you missed the playoff. In 2017, Alabama goes 13-1, wins the national championship. In 2018, Bama follows it up with a 14-1 record, that single loss coming in the national championship game. In 2018, Clemson goes 15-0, wins the national championship. In 2019, they follow it up by going 14-1, losing in the Natty. Who did they lose to? LSU. LSU in 2019 went 15-0, that incredible Joe Burrow team. Won the national championship, followed it up in 2020. Now, this is a bit of an outlier because they followed it up in 2020, which, as we all know, was the COVID season. Things were just weird that year. So LSU 2019, 15-0 national championship. They followed it up in 2020 by going 5-5 and obviously missed the playoffs. So in 2020, the team that did win the national championship, Alabama, went 13-0. They weren't canceling games down in Bama. They were like, hell no, I don't give a shit what kind of viruses. We play football down here in Bama. Alabama went 13-0, won the national championship, and then followed that up in 2021 by going 13-2 and losing in the national championship. They lost to Georgia in 2021. Georgia goes 14-0, wins the national championship, follows that up in 2022 by going 15-0, winning back-to-back national championships. And then in 2023, obviously 13-1, they missed the playoffs. The 2023 season belonged to the Michigan Wolverines, who went 15-0, won a national championship. And so the biggest fall off, as I mentioned, out of that group was LSU going from 15-0 to 5-5, but that was during the COVID year. You had one repeat champion, one team that went back-to-back, and that was Georgia in 2021 and 2022. You had 4 times that the national championship missed the playoff the following year, and you had 5 times where the reigning national championship or champion was back in the national championship game the following year. The average record for a team in the playoff era after winning a national championship, the average record, 13-1. So by and large, any team that wins the national championship in the playoff era has been very, very successful in the following year. Now, I get that circumstances have changed a little bit. Michigan has lost a lot of talent on the roster. They lost Jim Harbaugh. None of the teams I mentioned, by the way, lost their head coach after winning the national championship. So things are a bit unique. And then you add into it no divisions. You add into it an expanded playoff to 12 teams. But the playoff really doesn't have an impact, I think, on what Michigan's regular season record is going to be. So when I tell you the average record for a team after winning a national championship in the playoff era is 13-1. Where do you think that puts the University of Michigan? Do you think Michigan is capable of sustaining the success that we've seen since 2014 of teams that have won it all? Or do you think, given all the circumstances surrounding the playoff this year, that we might see a bit more of a drop-off for the Wolverines?
Well, I think the key thing with all the teams that have won, like you're talking about all blue bloods, Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, Clemson there for a while was one of the best teams around for several years. LSU, they went on that run. They've kind of faded a little bit, but still, I mean, you're talking about blue bloods of college football. And Michigan, they've been as good as anybody too the last 3 years. And yeah, I mean, I realize it's a brand new coaching staff. Jim Harbaugh's gone. The other thing too is I wonder how many of those teams lost their starting quarterback after the year that they won it. Like JJ McCarthy, that's a huge loss. And as we've talked about ad nauseum, and
I can tell you one team that did. It was LSU, and then they went 5-5.
Yeah, we won't talk about that one. But yeah, so what's Michigan going to get out of the quarterback spot? Is it going to be Orgy? Is it going to be Davis Warren, Jack Tuttle? Like, who's it going to be, and how are they going to perform? Defensively, yeah, Michigan should be as good as they were last year, I believe. It just comes down to that quarterback spot. If they just get good play, fair to good play, I feel like they can go, maybe not repeat as national champions, but I feel like they could win 10, 11, 12 games, I think. So yeah, I feel like they've kind of established themselves as blue bloods as those other teams did before. And I don't see a huge drop off with the schedule they have. I could see potentially 1 or 2 losses, but with the new 12 team format, you can lose 1 or 2, possibly 3 games and still get into the playoff.
Yeah, I agree. I just, when you look at worst, after winning a national championship, those teams have gone on at worst to have 2 losses. Again, the outlier being LSU, but that was 2020, the COVID season, not really putting too much stock into that. It feels like the standards should remain high for the University of Michigan. And that's kind of what I worry about is when you look at all these factors that we just talked about, like, man, they lost 20 guys to the NFL, damn, they lost Jim Harbaugh. Oh, they lost JJ McCarthy. Now there's no division. So it's far more open to try to win a Big Ten championship. And then you got the expanded playoff. To me, those are all like excuses. I think that the University of Michigan football program has now reached a point where, even with all those losses, a rebuild is unacceptable. And I think CJ makes a great point here. And Trent, you and I have talked about this before. If Michigan, I think you asked me this on the last show, if Michigan would have went and hired a coach from outside the program, there would be more concern. But keeping more in place and elevating him to head coach is certainly going to help a lot. And I 100% subscribe to that, because Sharon Moore, he's been through the trenches with these guys. He was there in 2020 at the low point when Michigan went 2-4. He was there when the culture shift happened in Ann Arbor, and he watched Jim Harbaugh build this thing from average second or third place finisher in the Big Ten to kings of the Big Ten, national champions, 3-time conference champions. Like, Sharon Moore had a front row seat, and not just a front row seat, but a pretty big hand in helping make all of that happen. And so I think being able to retain him and elevate him to the head coaching position, we've mentioned it before, the players that are on that team have a ton of respect for Sharon Moore. They thought it was his time. Michigan got it right there. Now we'll see how it plays out on the field, but I feel a little bit uneasy about this idea that it's okay for Michigan to take a step back given all the things they've had to encounter. For me, it's business as usual in 2024. You go out, you handle your business in the regular season, you beat Ohio State, you win the Big Ten championship. I know the playoff expansion is going to make things a little more difficult. So to me, the playoffs is like the icing on the cake. But the core of what you need to do during the season as a Michigan Wolverine is you got to beat Ohio State and you got to win the conference championship. I don't think that those goals should change at all, even when considering everything else Michigan is facing. Do you think that's a fair standard to hold this program to, given what they've become over the last 3 seasons?
Definitely. And like I said, if you're going to be a blue blood college football program, which I do believe Michigan is right now, then yeah, I mean, you've got to take care of your business. You have to beat your rivals. You expect to win championships, whether that's your conference or a national. And that should be the goal. And Sherrone Moore, he was a head coach last year. He beat Ryan Day. Like, he's used to, like, all he knows is beating Ohio State right now. So I mean, that should be, as do the players. That's all they know is beating Ohio State.
Yeah.
And that should be their goal every year going into it. Like, what can we do to be better than we were last year? Beat Ohio State, win a championship.
Yeah, exactly. And BJ Cross, you're 100% right. Strength of schedule is not like it was in years past. And especially when you factor in, the non-conference game against Texas, and then you add teams like, USC and Oregon and Washington and UCLA into the conference. Yeah, the path to a Big Ten championship becomes much more difficult. But the standard at the University of Michigan, to me, does not change. And I think Sherrone Moore echoed that sentiment. And it's not like he's going to, go up to the podium in a press conference and be like, well, let's pump the brakes here. I think the standard needs to change. No, I mean, he's saying everything he needs to say. But even as somebody who covers the program and tries to be realistic, like, I'm well aware that Michigan lost a ton of talent. I cover the team. Trent, how much time do we spend looking at the roster and analyzing, like, who do we think is going to be there and what's this guy
way too much time.
And where is the experience coming from? I mean, we live in that world. And if I thought there was a scenario where Michigan was going to be dog shit this year, like, I would say it. I just, realistically, I don't think that's the case. I see 2 regular season losses at most, but I fully believe Michigan can go 11-1, win a Big Ten championship, put themselves in a great position in the playoff, and then we'll see what happens from there. That might be a good way to segue into what I put out today, which was what I think is the best case and worst case scenario for the University of Michigan in 2024. We'll go through the list. I'm going to put it up on the screen. We'll start out with the bad news first, the worst case scenario. And when I put this out, there was some dissension. I'll just say this. There was some disagreement on, the way that I perceived a worst case scenario, particularly as it relates to where I think one of the losses could come from. But let's just get it up on screen here. Let me make us a little bit bigger while we talk about this. Okay. So Trent, this is my worst case scenario for 2024. And again, when I talk about worst case scenarios, like, I don't think, I'm trying to be realistic here. Michigan's not going to go out in week 1 at home and shit the bed against Fresno State, right? That's just a win in my book. But I do think if the wheels come off and things don't go according to plan, and Michigan does struggle at the quarterback position, and the offensive line doesn't gel as well as we hoped it would, and maybe there's bigger issues in the secondary, even though you got Will Johnson and Makari Page, maybe there's bigger issues in the secondary than we were led to believe early on. I could see a worst case scenario that has Michigan finishing the regular season at 7-5, and then obviously missing the playoff. And so week 1, I've got the W. Week 2 is where I think, this is a very realistic possibility for Michigan to lose this game, even though it's at home against Texas. And the reason I say that is because I think Michigan's still going to be figuring a lot of things out offensively in terms of who they are and what they want to do, getting a new offensive line to work together, figuring out the quarterback position. I know they've got a stout defense, but Texas in your building, that's a tall task for a team that's replacing so much. I have that as the first loss in the worst case scenario. Trent, what are your thoughts on Texas being the first loss under this scenario?
Yeah, absolutely. Even if you think Michigan's going to beat Texas, if we're talking about the most realistic worst case scenario, that you have to include Texas as a loss here. I mean, Texas should be really good. They should be right there in the playoff mix, and in Michigan, they're stepping in with a new quarterback, and offense is going to look different. So yeah, it's definitely possible that they could lose that game.
Yeah, and then Michigan gets back on track week 3 against Arkansas State. That's a W. Even in a worst case scenario for me, Michigan's winning that game. I mean, they could sleepwalk through that game and still get the W. But then week 4, USC comes to Ann Arbor, and I can already see it in the comments. USC is soft. They don't have a lot of talent. I get it. But Lincoln Riley is a good football coach, and it's not like USC is going to be starved of talent. They are going to have guys that are capable of making plays. I think USC is going to be better than Michigan State. So, I mean, and we've seen a more talented Michigan team lose to a Michigan State team in Ann Arbor. We've seen those things play out before. So to me, as a worst case scenario, I could see a scenario where USC comes into Ann Arbor, hands Michigan its second loss of the season. I know we haven't done a ton of studying up on the Trojans, Trent, but as you look at a worst case scenario, I mean, week 4 USC, is this something that you see as a potential loss if the wheels come off?
Sure, yeah. Lincoln Riley, yeah, their defense hasn't been good. It's not been good at all, but offensively, they've been really good. Quarterback Miller Moss, he tore it up in the bowl game last year, assuming that he probably starts this year. Yeah, I mean, sure, not that I think that they're going to beat Michigan, but in this scenario, yeah, I could see Michigan potentially losing the game.
Sure. Again, worst case scenario, wheels come off. You're struggling at the quarterback position. The offensive line isn't gelling the way you hope. So yeah, that's going to impact the running game. We know Michigan's defense is going to be stout, at least up front. But what's that secondary going to look like, and how's Michigan going to operate offensively? Those are two big question marks right now. And then you go through some of these other games here. You got Minnesota. Now, when I get to a potential third loss under the worst case scenario, I had a decision I had to make here, Trent. And I talked to you about this before we went live. To me, that third loss was either going to come at Washington or it was going to come at home against Michigan State. And the reason why I went with Michigan State is because Washington, in some ways, is in a similar situation as Michigan. They are replacing a ton of key talent and they lost their head coach. And so they've got a lot of figuring out to do. Now, I think unlike Washington, Michigan has a ton of elite talent returning to Ann Arbor, even though they've lost quite a bit of guys. For me, I settled on Michigan State because the Mel Tucker era is over. Jonathan Smith, I think, is bringing a new juice to the team. He's been able to get some decent guys out of the portal. Aaron Childs as quarterback looks like he's going to be the guy. We'll see what he ultimately becomes. But as a Michigan fan, we have seen that movie before where Michigan enters the contest as the heavy favorite. Michigan State's underrated or the underdog, and things go south for Michigan. Am I saying that that's what's going to happen this year? No, I don't think that's how it's going to play out. But certainly in a worst case scenario, yeah, I could see Michigan State coming into Ann Arbor and handing Michigan a loss in Sharon Moore's first year. Is it likely? No. Probable? No. Possible? Yes. What do you think about Michigan State being a potential loss at number 8 there, week 8?
I mean, I see everything you're saying, but
let me ask you this. If you had to go between Michigan State and Washington, because at Washington is not a cakewalk. That's a difficult environment to go play. It's far away from Ann Arbor. It's a new environment for Michigan. If you were having to decide between those two, you'd settle on Washington?
Yeah, if we're talking about the worst case scenario, I'm going to go with Washington. I feel like that game's probably going to be a primetime game. It's at Washington. Jed Fish is the new coach. Great offensive mind. I feel like he might have that by week 6. He might have that team humming a little bit. Michigan State, though, gosh, man, that's a huge rivalry. Yeah, I get that. What's it, Jonathan Smith? Is that his name? Yeah. I think that he's going to have Michigan State better. Yeah, but Sharon Moore's it's his first year as a head coach. He doesn't want to lose to Michigan State at home year 1. So I feel like he's going to have the Wolverines pumped and ready to go as well. And being at Michigan, I just don't see any case or any scenario that they lose to the Spartans.
Yeah, and Chris Hamill from the Facebook page, he says, why are we downplaying Moore as a head coach? Why can't he kill it in his first year? I don't think anybody's downplaying Sharon Moore. I think Trent and I, we've both been pretty open that we think he's going to do a hell of a job, that he was the right guy. This is part 1 of a 2-part segment. This is worst case scenario. We're going to follow it up with best case scenario. But I think the worst case scenario hinges on some of the things we've mentioned as we've gone through this list, where Michigan is breaking in a new quarterback situation. There's some uncertainty there. There's some uncertainty with the offensive line. We believe it's going to be good, but this is an entirely new offensive line that Michigan's going to be sending out in 2024. And if you struggle to get that right, that impacts your ability to move the ball through the air and on the ground. And so until we see those things, I think a worst case scenario is certainly possible. I don't think it's any indictment on Sharon Moore. I just think it's a matter of where the Michigan football program is right now and what they're having to replace. So Michigan State potentially gives Michigan its 3rd loss of the season. And then Trent, this week 9 matchup in Ann Arbor against Oregon, this one scares me. Oregon, once again, is loaded. They've got the quarterback position figured out with Dylan Gabriel, got him out of the transfer portal, also snagged Dante Moore out of the transfer portal. We know Oregon likes to play fast. We know they got a ton of athletes. And from what I've read, Oregon's offensive line is supposed to be pretty damn good this year. Defensively, I'm not really sure what they have going on there, so that'll be something to look into a little bit more. But certainly in a worst-case scenario, we would have to put Oregon on the list as a potential loss. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on record saying that I'm predicting 10-2 for Michigan, and that's one of my losses on the year. So, yeah, I mean, you have to put Oregon in there as a potential loss for sure.
Yeah, I mean, they are the team. You got Texas there. I know a lot of people think Ohio State might be high on the list, but to me, I put Texas at the top of the list only because, like, if you were to flip it and put Oregon week 2 and Texas week 9, to me, Oregon would be the biggest threat on the schedule. But because of where Texas is, I put them at number 1. But certainly at week 9, there's a very real chance that Oregon could come into Ann Arbor, hand Michigan the loss. And then week 10 at Indiana. Look, man, Indiana just isn't a very good football team. That's just what it is. And Michigan is accustomed to beating them. Same thing with Northwestern in week 11. I think that's a W. And then again, as much as we hate to admit it, is we spend a significant amount of time in the show just shitting on all things Ohio State. It's very real possibility that Michigan goes into Columbus and the Buckeyes snap that 3-game losing streak under the worst case scenario. Trent, I'm sure you would agree, but you care to elaborate
on Ohio State?
Yeah.
I mean, it's at Ohio State, and they're obviously they have to beat Michigan. They're at that point in Ryan Day's tenure where he has to beat Michigan. So absolutely, it's a real possibility that the Buckeyes snap that losing streak.
So what do you think? So I've got worst case scenario at 7-5. Is that too harsh? Is that too doomsday for this team? Or do you think, as you're looking at the schedule, maybe you'd switch Michigan State with Washington? But again, if the wheels come off and things don't go the way we expect, is 7-5 in your mind a realistic possibility for a worst case scenario?
Yeah, we're talking worst possible scenario. I could see 7-5. The only thing I would switch is the Washington and Michigan State game, because I don't see Michigan losing to Michigan State in year 1 at home against Sherrod Moore. But no, I mean, if injuries happen and quarterback play is just terrible, yeah, 7-5 is, with this schedule, I would say it's realistic.
Yeah, and Ricky from the Facebook page, I don't want to slaughter your last name. I'll try it anyway. Villapando, Ricky Villapando. I hope I got that right. He says, way too harsh, man. And then he follows it up with Washington and Michigan State are wins. Look, I believe you. I believe that Michigan State and Washington are both wins. But what we're talking about here is if things don't go according to plan, and you look at this schedule, what are some losses that you could see that are realistic possibilities? To me, these are the 5 games that I think are going to give Michigan the most fits if things don't go according to plan. If the offensive line doesn't gel, if you struggle to get the QB situation figured out, and then maybe you have some issues in the secondary. So again, this is a worst case scenario. This is not how I see the season playing out. I don't think Michigan is going to experience worst case scenario. Let's flip over to what I think is the best case scenario. Trent, best case scenario, 12-0 regular season?
It's got to be. Yeah,
it's got to be, right?
You got to win every game.
Well, not quite for me. To me, as we flip over to best case scenario, I've got Michigan going 11-1 on the season. 11-1, which I think if you factor in all of the losses that Michigan has had during the offseason on the roster, the coaching changes that have taken place, if Michigan goes out in 2024 and they put together an 11-1 season, I think it would be extremely impressive. That likely puts them into the Big Ten championship game and then certainly puts them in the college football playoff. I think maybe where the discussion happens here is, where does that single loss come from? Because I think traditionally you would look at this schedule and you would see that week 12 matchup at Ohio State. You would take into account everything Ohio State has done during the offseason, how highly they're going to be rated. And you would say, surely that's where the loss comes from, right? Not for me. And I said it earlier, I am not buying the Ohio State hype. I think it's the same damn thing every single year. I think they load up on talent. I think they load up on high ego guys, and then they get put face to face with a Michigan team that likes to play smash mouth football, and they don't want any of it. Similar to what Roman Wilson said. They can wear the Gucci and they can do this and talk this, but when they get out on the field, they're not built like that. They don't want it. So to me, I'm not buying Ohio State being Michigan's loss this year. I think best case scenario, 11-1 with the single loss coming week 2 at Texas for the reasons I already mentioned, Trent. This is week 2. This is a team that's still trying to figure out who they are, how they operate, break in a new offensive line, break in a quarterback, figure some things out in the secondary. I think if there's one loss that's going to occur in a best case scenario, it comes early week 2 against Texas while Michigan's still trying to find its sea legs. What do you think about this in terms of best case scenario? Do you think it's really 12-0, or do you think best case is still 11-1?
I agree with you that I do think best case is probably 11-1. I know everybody wants to think 12-0, but let's be honest. This is a tough schedule. Michigan, this is a difficult schedule. Even that week 1 against Fresno State, they're nobody. But man, the last 3 years they've went, I think 10-3, 9-5, and 9-4, or something like that. So I mean, they can win games.
Yeah.
Not that Michigan should struggle with them. I'm just saying that their schedule is tough this year. But for me, something about Texas week 2, big house. I think the fans and Michigan itself is going to be pumped up and riled up, and
there's no doubt
they want to prove that they're still elite. And what better way to do it than beat Texas week 2? So I do think Michigan will win against Texas. My loss comes between Oregon and, I know nobody wants to hear it, but Ohio State.
Where is it on the soundboard? Goddamn it! I think I took the boot. Did I take it off? Did I take the? Let's see. Where is it? No. Damn it! I must
not. Yeah, that's definitely not
soundboard.
But no, Oregon, man, they're high flying. They're coming from the Pac-12. Dan Lanning wants to show that they can beat Big Ten teams. I think personally, they're probably the best Big Ten team right now on paper. So yeah, it's at Michigan, but Oregon, I think they're elite. And Ohio State, going back to what I said before, I think this is a must win for Ryan Day. It's at the shoe. They've lost 3 straight to Michigan. I could see it happening, man. Not that I obviously I don't want it to happen, but I could see it happening.
Trying to get a little bit of love to the folks in Ohio so that he doesn't have to put his property up for sale. That might be a good thing, though. The trend you can move up to Michigan, you can upgrade here, you can be in the Mitten State. Like, it might not be a bad thing for that to happen. But look, for reasons I've already said multiple times throughout the show, I am not a believer in Ohio State. They are who they are, and at the end of the day, Ryan Day is still the head coach. I think they get into the game in Columbus. I think they realize that, holy shit, the Michigan defense is still for real. You got Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham and Derek Moore and Josiah Stewart coming off the edge. You've got Hausman and Jayshawn Barham at the linebacker position. You got Will Johnson out there and Makari Page roaming the field. Like, these boys are going to come to play, and Ohio State's going to get punched in the mouth. And once again, Ryan Day is going to start to overthink it. He's going to start to coach scared, and Michigan is going to run away with that football game. And it might be a repeat of what we saw in 2022 with Donovan Edwards, just open space, waving goodbye to the folks in Columbus. That's how I see it playing out. I am not a believer in the Buckeyes, but I do agree. Oregon scares me a little bit. They've got some talent. It's going to be, when's the last time Oregon came and played at Michigan Stadium? I mean, it hasn't happened. I'm sure it's happened at least once. Have to do some research on it, but it hasn't happened to my knowledge in my lifetime that I'm aware of. They're going to be highly motivated to come into that game against the defending national champions and make a statement. And they've got the talent to do it. They've got the mentality to do it. I think those 2 games present the biggest challenge for Michigan on the schedule. But for me, because of where that Texas game is and because of what I think Michigan's still going to be trying to figure out, that's where I've got the single loss coming. Let's see, 2007. There we are. So 2007.
Okay, I was thinking that was at Oregon, but apparently it wasn't.
Yeah, 2007 was the last time. Thank you, Bobby, from the Facebook page. 2007 is the last time that Oregon played a game in the Big House, and I think they're going to be motivated to show out as part of the Big Ten. And there's going to be, Big Ten championship implications on the line at that point. There's no doubt about it. So those are two games to keep your eye on. But, best case scenario, I think, is 11-1. I'm settled on 10-2. That's where I'm at. When I look at this schedule, I think
that's where I'm at.
Goes 10-2. 2 losses maybe coming to Texas and Oregon. Can't see a loss at Ohio State. And I'm looking at the rest of these guys like, no, Michigan State, at Washington, potentially just because of the environment. But environment can only do so much, man. They lost a ton out there in Washington. You get Minnesota at home. You get USC at home. I think 10-2 is where this thing falls. We'll see what that means in terms of a Big Ten championship and where Michigan ultimately ends up in the playoff. But let me ask you this as we close out the show, as we hit an hour and 4 minutes here. If Michigan goes 10-2, even if there's 3 losses, if the Wolverines ultimately make the playoff, is it a successful season regardless? Like does making the playoff minimize any losses you would have experienced during the regular season? Not to say you don't want to win them, but the ultimate goal is really to win a national championship at the end of the day. So if Michigan is in the playoffs, does it matter how they get there?
No, I think it depends on what they do in the playoffs. So say they lose. So far, I'm saying they're going to lose to Oregon, Ohio State. So say that they lose to both of those teams and they get drilled game 1 in the playoff. Yeah, I think it's probably a failure of a season. But if they win a couple games or come close to that natty, then yeah, it's a great, even with losing to Ohio State, I think it's a successful season. Because if you can beat a couple good teams in the playoff, I think that means something.
So Trent, you've got the 2 losses, Oregon and Ohio State at 10-2. You think Michigan finishes the regular season 10-2, losses to Oregon, losses to Ohio State, keeps them out of the Big Ten championship, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so keeps them out of the Big Ten championship. I've got losses, Texas at home, Oregon at home, but I've got Michigan in the Big Ten championship. So I can't wait to see how that plays out. We're both at 10-2, which I think is incredible given what type of offseason it's been for Michigan. And if they can get to 10-2 and win a conference championship and be a playoff team, I think a lot of people are going to be excited about what Sharon Moore is able to do in his first year. And honestly, man, I'm a believer in Sharon Moore. I know that somebody pointed it out that maybe we didn't have some faith in what he's capable of. We saw it play out last year, and we saw it play out under circumstances that I think few other people have to deal with, where you have to step in as head coach. You find out last minute that Jim Harbaugh's suspended going into Happy Valley, like at the last second, and you've got to assume that role. And then the 32 straight runs, and then he's the head coach against Ohio State. Like, everything Sharon Moore did at the end of, by the way, he was the head coach for the 1,000th win at Maryland. Like, everything he needed to do at the end of the season, he did. He accomplished it, and I think it set the stage for what will ultimately be an incredible run in 2024, and I can't wait to see how it all plays out. So, oh my gosh, Trent, once again, I always get on here thinking like, do we have enough for an hour-long show? Is it maybe just going to go 20 minutes, and then sure as shit, we always go north of an hour? And the fan interaction was great. Admittedly, I've got to get better at putting comments on the screen here, because I can see them flowing in. We get hundreds of comments during the lives, and I'm trying to juggle the topics and make sure I stay on point with what I'm saying and not sound like an idiot as much as possible, and sort of guide the show along. But I think I would like to bring back a fan-led show where we show up here and we just let people ask questions, and we spend more time engaging with the people that are here and investing their time into this, because I appreciate it. It makes it so much more enjoyable when there's other people throwing in their 2 cents. And maybe that's something we can schedule for Monday. Maybe we just say, we skip the topics and we say, we're going to show up Monday. We're going to sit here and drink mimosas until some questions come in, and we'll see what happens. Maybe that's what we do next Monday. I think 6 o'clock was a good spot, right? Yeah,
I saw different names in here this time around, and I feel like it went really well.
Seemed to work. I really enjoyed it. Let's do 6 o'clock next Monday as well. We will see everybody back at that point in time. Again, appreciate all the involvement. Tony, Darren, Matt, BJ, all these guys, Lydia, Bobby, a lot of people that are in here all the time, man. Appreciate you guys, and we'll check in with you next Monday. See you, Trent.
Yep. See you, man. Thanks.
Hey.